building and say, ooh, 1720s, you know, late medieval, Victorian. I come here and I say, I have no clue what date that building is. I couldn't do it because I just didn't have the knowledge, you know, the knowledge. So that was quite an interesting thing to happen, because you sort of realize that there's a lot of stuff that you think is common everywhere and isn't. Another example of that I learned quite quickly when I came here was that you know, a lot of historic American buildings are of wood frame, and of course even a lot of modern buildings are wood frame, which was an astonishment to me too. But you know, historical wood framed buildings, I assumed would be exactly the same as wood framed buildings in England, because after all, so many of the people that founded this country came from the British Isles anyway. So it was obvious that the houses would be the same. There's these folk called the Dutch. And to my astonishment, I learned that the Dutch have a completely different way of erecting framed buildings. Oh, well, yes, they have us in many ways, of course. But, you know, that was something I never learned in England. I had to come here to learn that, which was kind of amazing. Anyway, that's probably enough preliminary stuff. But I want to ask one question first. How many of you in this audience live or believe you live in a Foursquare house? Ooh, quite a lot. Great. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you guys then, because, yeah. You know, it's a bit nerve-wracking sort of trying to talk about something that you know other people probably know as much or as more than you do. So bear with me. This is really an enthusiasm of mine. I just got sort of enthused about this and started taking pictures and doing research. And so it's just been a fun journey that I kind of wanted to share with you. But I'm hoping to learn more. There's a lot more to learn about these houses in Hopewell Borough. And so I brought some homework for you all, at least those of you who live in Foursquare houses. I've got a little questionnaire sheet here, and we're going to pass it around. And if you live in one of these houses, put the address down, who you are, a way of contacting you, and anything else you know about the date or anything else about the house. That'd be really, really helpful. So I'm going to bring this over here, and you can just pass it around. There's a pen and everything. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to pass around while I'm talking, in case I get too boring, is this is one of the things that inspired me to do this. This is the 1926 Sears Roebuck catalogue of houses that you could buy through mail order, and there are quite a few Foursquare houses in this book. But it's very interesting to see, because it's got all the documents of how you applied. I'd like one of these, please, and all how you're going to finance it, and where do you want it delivered to, which train station should it come to, and all kinds of other stuff like that. Really an amazing episode in American history, and the Foursquare houses were a kind of prominent part of that. So I'm going to pass this around to just flip through it, pass it on as we go around. So, okay, so Foursquares to the fore. So this the first slide here does have an image of kind of a Foursquare house, one of the very early examples in the borough. It's on 12 Blackwell Avenue, and you can see some of the characteristics of it. You know, it's very square looking, has a big porch large to the front, these very prominent windows in the roof space, and other aspects. But this isn't probably quite exactly a real true Foursquare, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So where do these houses come from? You know, they're just going to spring out of the ground. You know, somebody says, oh, I'm going to design a Foursquare house. There's obviously a history to this, like there is to any other, you know, architectural style or anything like that. and specifically for the Foursquare house. Architectural historians, of whom I'm not one, just to make sure you know that, trace the origin of this type of house back to the movements in the 1890s and around about 1900 of sort of simplifying architecture. Before that time, you're dealing with either rather conventional looking, what we might think of as, colonial revival kind of houses, a central doorway, window, or very fancy Gothic things, of which we got some lovely examples here in Hopewell Borough. But there's a movement round about 1900s, to sort of simplify and get away from the fuss, what they perceived as the kind of the fussiness or the traditionalness of these other architectural styles. And they were inspired in part to do this by the West, by the sort of great open spaces and the idea of expansion and great vistas and things like that. And one of the leading people in this movement, of course, was Frank Lloyd Wright, a tremendously famous and influential architect who really promoted what was then called the prairie style of architecture, which featured, as you can see on this picture, these rather overhanging eaves, flat overhanging eaves on the roofs, a lot of linearity, a very sort of lots of sort of straight angles, right angles, sort of squarish, rectangular, no fuss kind of appearance, and lots of windows, lots of light coming in to these houses. And certainly in terms of the prairie style houses, these were very kind of upscale houses. They were very, very nice and very, individually designed by Wright and other architects. And but it was very influential. People started really saying, this kind of, we like this look of this sort of, we're in this new century now, 1900, and America is going great. It's developing very fast. It's becoming wealthier very fast. And so these houses in some sense represent a new kind of era in what people think houses ought to be like. Not that the other kinds of houses didn't go on being built, but this was a new appearance on the scene. So this is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's famous houses, and many of these are on the National Register of Historic Places. Falling Water is the one that everybody knows about. Well, there's several Falling Waters. They're not strictly prairie style, but anyway, to move on. So I'm going to start my talk by not talking about Foursquare houses, because this isn't one. But what's great about this one is that it appears on the cover of the 1926 Sears Roebuck catalogue. It's called, the style of the house is the Alhambra, and this one was built on Llewellyn Street in 1926 for the cost of $3,134. Very nice. And you see it's in very good shape. It has not been altered very much at all from its original appearance. There's been a bit of an addition on the right-hand side there, but just expanded out a little bit from the model on the cover of the catalogue. But otherwise, you can see it's virtually identical. The reason being, of course, that it's a kit. It's a huge erector set. And you buy it from Sears Roebuck, and they put it all together in a giant Amazon fulfillment type package, put it on the train, and it gets delivered to the Hopewell station, and then offloaded and brought on carts or whatever. And you open up the instructions, and it says, written actually in English that you can understand, take this bit and put it here, and very detailed instructions to how to build the house. And of course, if you bought one of these, you could either do it yourself, which I think quite a number of people did. I think some of the houses in Hopewell were built by the people that bought them. They had this Yankee can-do attitude. I'm buying a house and I'm going to put it up. Where does this bit go? So they're also very American in that way. I think they represent a kind of, they're both architecturally very American to me, and they reflect a kind of attitude, a sort of can-do attitude. We can buy a house with a kit and put it together in a couple of months. Let's do it. So this is one of these kit houses. It's not a Foursquare house, but you can see it does have some stylistic similarities, particularly with the big overhanging eaves. A very distinctive feature of these houses, these overhanging eaves, plus windows in the attic space. A lot of use made of the attic space in these houses, and I'll come on to that a bit later on. Anyway, having talked a lot about Foursquare houses, let's look at a really nice example one. This is 129 West Broad Street, and it really is, I think, a classic example of what let me say, the larger versions of this house were supposed to look like. And you can see the different. I've highlighted some of the features there. In the attic space, you have these dormer windows, often on all four sides, or at least three sides, bringing a lot of light into the attic space, which was clearly intended to be used for something, and we'll come on to that too later on. This hipped roof, the very prominent overhanging eaves, which we've talked about before, giving the impression of a sort of roof that's really sort of overhanging around the house. Very commonly, the exterior finishes of the first floor and the second floor are different. And as you see it is here, you've got sort of shingles on the second floor and more like boards or conventional siding on the first floor. You probably know that's a thing I have to think about when I say that, because in England, the first floor is the ground floor and the second floor is the first floor. Of course, everybody knows that. Perfectly logical. Anyway, the whole impression is sturdiness and sort of solidity and sort of quality. I mean, it looks kind of like well-built house. Almost always with a wide front porch. Sometimes wrap around, goes around the corner as well. On the bottom left, you see the window projecting there. That's usually a treatment for what's intended to be the dining room. You'll find that in various variations of that. Just a slight projecting window. And again, nothing fancy, but nice windows, lots of light coming in. Although quite a lot of use of stained glass as well in the doors and things like that to add a sort of richness to the building. So those are really the classic features of the exteriors of these Foursquare houses. And there's a sort of continuum. There's some things, as we'll see, that you look at them first and think, oh yes, it's a Foursquare house, but not quite. And we'll see how you can do that. So after this evening, you'll be able to go around Hopewell and go, Foursquare. It's not Foursquare. Amaze your friends. And just to bring you the contrast, that houses are different in different places. This is the kind of house that I grew up in England. And these are incredibly familiar to anybody who grew up in England in the first 3/4 of the 20th century, the semi-detached house. And so you see, it's nothing like a Foursquare house. I mean, it's a completely different kind of animal. But this is what I thought. If somebody says, what is a house? If you'd asked me when I was 10, what's a house like? I'd say it's like this. And you have neighbors you share a wall with, and it's okay most of the time. And you can see this doesn't share many stylistic features at all with the Foursquare. It has these sort of gabled and bow windows, which are sort of kind of alluding to Tudor architecture way back 16th century. They're trying to, it's a sort of antique-y kind of reference, fairly mild, but that's what they're kind of trying to convey here. We come from a long tradition, of English yeoman houses, but as you can see, they too are quite solid and actually very comfortable, very nice houses to grow up in. I lived in the one above. My bedroom was above the front door, This isn't my house, by the way. There's about 200 million of them. I'm exaggerating. There must be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of these in the UK. And if you've been there, you've probably seen them. So this is what's going on in the UK while the Foursquares are holding forth in the US. So let's come down and look at actual Hopewell itself, finally. What I tried to do on this map is to firstly show where all the Foursquares are. They're the black circles, as you can imagine. And amazingly, there are 52 of them in Hopewell Borough alone. It doesn't, when you look at it, the map doesn't look as if it's 52, but when you count them, that's what it comes to. There's probably a similar number in Pennington. I haven't even begun to look at Pennington, and you know, and there are ones in rural settings throughout the township as well. What the different colors mean on this map is the areas that were mapped by the Sanborn Map Company between 1902 and 1927. Many of you may be familiar with these maps. They were made as fire insurance maps. And they are very detailed. They tell you a lot about the houses and the buildings. The buildings are shown in quite a lot of detail. And the area that they cover gives you a pretty good sense of what the built-up area was at that time, because they wouldn't go out into the countryside. It wasn't worth their while. They were mapping areas that were well built up, where they could hope to sell fire insurance and all that. So you see the pink area is the earliest Sanborn mapping of 1902, which shows, you know, the area that's sort of then Hopewell at that time. It's already grown quite a bit from what it was in the 1870s, partly because of the railroad, which brought a lot of new stuff going on into Hopewell. Unfortunately for some of the people here, they were left out of the 1902 mapping, and they didn't get in until 1927. This is the brown area in the middle, which is basically Center Street, which has several excellent Foursquare houses on it, but they weren't there in 1902. So this is one way that we can get the general dating of these houses. Of course, many people know the dates of their houses, or it's possible to research them. And as you may know, the Hopewell Valley Historical Society offers an incredible service of researching the history of your house to find this sort of information. So then we come to the pale blue colored bits, which was how Hopewell had expanded by 1912. And you'd see it's Model Avenue Columbia Avenue. The bottom right is extended outwards, and developments creeping up Broad Street and Llewellyn Street, and more importantly, the whole area north of the railroad, Burton Place and Hart Avenue, and on that area, that's starting to be developed by this time quite a lot too. And then by 1927, the sort of peripheral areas and this central donut around Central Street are also being covered. The other somewhat interesting piece of information on this is the red dotted line you see over to the left-hand side there. That is the western boundary of the borough up to 1915, when it was expanded westward. They must have known that Taylor Terrace was going to be built in later years. But you can see that the majority of the houses, of the Foursquares, fall within the areas that are mapped by the Sanborn Map Company. There's just sort of one outlier way up on Llewellyn Street, on the other side of the railroad tracks, up there on the left-hand side near Hart Avenue. But all the others are kind of in the town. As you can see, there's sort of little clusters of them. There's a nice cluster along West Broad Street, and along several on Prospect Avenue south of Broad Street there. And the rest of them sort of scattered about. So it's almost like a little district of Foursquare houses off Broad Street there. If you go out here and keep on up Broad Street and turn left, go around Prospect Street and all up there. quite a few of these houses up in that area. So this helps us a bit to understand the sort of chronology of the Foursquare houses. But in fact, by 1912, there were only about half a dozen of these houses were mapped. So they weren't, I think it's 9, excuse me, I think it's 9. By 1912, there were 9 of these houses mapped. And so the pace really picks up from about 1912 up to 1930. Nothing much happens after 1929, as you can imagine. One of the casualties of the Great Depression was the kit houses, Sears's whole program of kit houses, and the Foursquare house kind of falls out of favor. I don't know quite why. That'd be an interesting thing to know, but possibly just because even this scale of housing was beyond many people's pockets throughout the 1930s, and so it sort of came to a bit of a screeching halt at that time. Here's some of the one of the earlier ones on Burton Avenue. I believe this is the residence of Mr. and Mrs. Michael Mills, and it's got this beautiful addition put on the back of it about 20 years ago by a famous architect. And this is one of a pair here that we know who built them and why and everything else. And they're built by, what's the first name of the Burton? The first name, John Burton, who also ran the factory up the road and everything. So here we have houses being built for his family, basically, and very close, very nice and close to the railroad. But again, you can see all the very typical features: the nice attic dormer windows, big windows everywhere else. You can see a sort of bay on the left-hand side there for the dining room. What would have been the dining room? It still is the dining room, right? The dining room downstairs and a master bedroom upstairs. Full basements on all of these houses. Basements were sort of de rigueur, partly because by this time central heating is coming in, and furnaces are being put into basements, coal-fired to start with, but moving on to oil. And so you need a basement, somewhere to put your furnace as much as anything else. And so they're very modern houses in this sense. They all have bathrooms and running water and toilets and all those kind of things, kitchens that were pretty much state of the art for the time, and say central heating, which we'd have dreamed of central heating in England back then. I remember my dad putting central heating into our house in the 1960s. Anyway, moving on. And now we come to where it can get a little kind of tricky to know whether you're dealing with a Foursquare or not. The top one here is probably well known to everybody. It's near to the pharmacy. It's on West Broad Street, right next to the Runyon House, which is currently being really renovated, and new buildings at the back, and next to the Hopewell Pharmacy. And this is built in 1912, and this is I think this is real top of the line Foursquare of that time. It's quite a massive structure with, and I don't know whether this is original, but on the right hand end, there's looks like a second story sort of sleeping porch being added on, and a porch on the first floor below. But really a very splendid house. Then 24 North Greenwood is a sneaky one, because when I first sort of was wandering around, and I said, oh yeah, there's another one. It's not actually a Foursquare house. It's very close. It shares many features, and it's of the right period, 1916. This is right opposite Chubby's, if you want to know where it is. But if you look carefully, you can see it retains somewhat what the Foursquare promoters would have regarded as rather, sort of decadent, old-fashioned details. It's got little brackets on either side of the bay window on the second floor, supporting the overhanging roof. The overhanging roof isn't flat on the bottom; it slopes, and you can see the sort of the rafter kind of structure there. That's not something that you would do on a classic Foursquare house. And it does have a wraparound porch, which is not, it does occur on Foursquare houses, but it's not all that common. Most of the porches just are on the front facade. So this is an example of somebody who had obviously been paying attention, if you like, to what was being built, but thought, I want something just a little bit more traditional looking, with a sort of slight Victorianness about it, and so that's what they did. They also did the different treatment of the exterior on the first floor and the second floor. The first floor, I think, here is stone, and the upper part is stucco, as you can see. So this is a cousin, a Foursquare cousin, and again, a very nice house indeed. Some of them give us quite interesting little connections to other aspects of Hopewell history, like this one, 9 Blackwell Avenue, again, classic, does have a wraparound porch, as you can see here. And in this case, what they've used for the walls of the porch and for the cladding of the first floor is this purplish brown brick stuff, which is actually called Hummelstown brick. And it's used for the former bank building on the corner of Broad and North Greenwood. And it's used for the sanctuary of this building, the oldest bit over here, 1914 to 1915. And the bank, I think, is 1912. And this was a popular material for a while because it was made at Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, which isn't far from Hershey, to may explain the chocolatey color, perhaps. And what they did was they said, you know what, they were making, it was a quarry, a sandstone quarry producing, good quality building stone. But in the early 1900s, they decided they would experiment with crushing the stone, mixing it with cement to make regular sized bricks that look like stone. And they do. That's what they do look like. When you come out, have a look at the sanctuary building, and you'll see how it's done. These were, quite a good deal. It was clearly cheaper than using actual cut stone ashlar, because the good predecessors here at the Presbyterian Church were originally thinking they'd like a nice, big stone ashlar kind of building, but they found that these bricks were much, much cheaper. So they used them. Very sensible of them too, because it's a good building material. But as far as I know, there's only those 3 buildings in Hopewell Borough that use this material. I think there's a few in Pennington as well, but it's a matter for future research. This Hummelstown brick, the actual quarries out at Hummelstown are so historically important that they're actually on the National Register of Historic Places. So there you go. Here's one where we have some actual kind of, more detailed anecdotal information. This is 10 Blackwell Avenue on the other side of the road from number 9. And we have a lot of information about this, built in 1908. So it's one of the early ones, built by John Wirt for his son, Walter Wirt. And we know that the land and the house together cost $4,100 time. But the interesting thing is it's a classic Foursquare in every way. As you can see on the plan at the bottom left, there's been an addition on the back of a dining room, pantry, and laundry. They probably weren't there originally, and what's here labeled the family room would have been the dining room, because that's usually the layout of these buildings. The bottom left is the living room, then you have the dining room, and you can get to the kitchen from both of those. But Mrs. Wirt she was okay with the house, but she did have some disappointments with it, which is interesting to hear what people thought of the houses they were moving in. Just why isn't the fireplace in the living room? Why did you put it in the dining room? It'd be much better in the living room. Why did you use cypress wood instead of chestnut? Probably cost for the flooring and the other wood details. And the staircase window didn't open on the landing. So, these sort of minor irritations, which I don't know whether she fixed them or not in the end, but anyway, so we have a little bit of personalization with this particular house. I think she was very lucky to have a nice house like that. So anyway, and just while we're looking at the plan, if you look at the upstairs on this one, you see there are 4 bedrooms, a master bedroom with well, they all got closets, a full bathroom. And in this case, between the master bedroom and the other bedroom below it, the staircase going up to the attic, which is not shown on most of the other plans. It's not clear how attic access was achieved unless it's by a trapdoor and pulling a ladder down. Anyway, I'll be interested to hear about that as we go through. But this one, you clearly could walk up. You could walk upstairs to the attic space. Now, why all these houses at this time? Well, it's partly just simply because of the expansion of the town. But I like to think there's a connection here with the trolley, because the trolley went, as you know, went right down Broad Street all the way out to Elm Street, where it turned around and came back again. And it's, a lot of these Foursquare houses are, within spitting distance of the trolley. And, I do like to think that at least some of the people in these Foursquare houses were commuting into Trenton on the trolley. Very, very much fits in with that period of time, living in sort of a semi-rural setting in a little town, but still able to go into the big city. It took about an hour or so, I think, to go in on the trolley. The trolley lines were pulled up in 1924 in Hopewell, but service continued from Pennington into Trenton, I think, well into the 1930s. So it's an aspect of transportation that we tend to forget about. I think Doug Robbins told me a story about, I think it was your dad, was it, with the Greece, your grandfather. It's quite a steep slope outside the church here from the intersection of Llewellyn Street, and he and some of the other irresponsible local youth were known to put grease on the tracks, stand back and watch the trolley try and get up the hill. It can't be true. It could be your family wouldn't do anything like that. Surely not. Surely not. So anyway, coming on to the role of Sears and Roebuck in all this, they weren't the only people to sell house kits, and they weren't the only people to sell plans either. But they were so well organized at that time that we tend to think of these as sort of almost Sears houses, although there were, as I say, there were other companies doing the same kind of thing. And of course, you could buy plans anyway. Architects and builders would buy plans and put them up on their own. And so there's quite a range of possibilities within this general style. But the way that Sears did it in 1909, they said, we'll send you the plans and the material and ship it to you. But they didn't pre-cut everything. So you got lots of wood that you had to cut and measure and all that. But then in 1916, they came out with the program that we think of now, which was a completely prefabricated houses, all the different bits that you needed with ready cut lumber and detailed instructions. And that went on from 1916 to 1933. Again, a casualty of the Great Depression, but incredibly clever thing to come up with. I mean, Sears, obviously, you'd be ordering stuff from Sears for a long time before this, but to think of them doing houses must have been quite a. I'd love to know who sort of came up with the idea. Is that feasible? And it was. And they even had their own mortgage company, and their mortgage terms were quite easy and low rates and all the rest of it. And they made it as easy as possible for people to buy these houses. Now, obviously, I think we can think of them as very solidly middle class houses. I don't think these are not workers' houses. These are the houses of people who are, hoping to make a bit of a statement in the world, perhaps. But they're not, they're not super. They vary in size from quite small to the very big, as we've seen. And in this catalogue, there's a whole slew. I forget how many models there are, but there are 9 Foursquare models in this particular catalogue. I haven't seen any of the earlier ones. This is the only one that I know of that's been reproduced. And so I acquired it a couple of years ago just to see how it all worked. And as it comes around, as I said, you'll see that you can all the paperwork is in there as to how to buy one of these houses is right in there in the catalogue. So it's a remarkable, I think it's a remarkable little story. And as I've said before, and emphasize again, I think these houses are very American. You don't see anything like them in the UK anyway. I mean, there may be other parts of Europe I haven't visited may have something similar. Perhaps in Scandinavia there are kind of similar things, but they really are very American and very of that period. And I think they're very, for that reason, they're really actually quite significant. That they haven't received much, historic preservation attention actually up to this point. For instance, I don't think, well, no, none of the houses in Hopewell, none of the Foursquare houses have been put forward as eligible for the National State Register of Historic Places. So they have no kind of status at this point, except for being in the historic district zone of the borough. And even their name, even the very name Foursquare, has only been applied in the last, I think, 30 or 40 years. They weren't called Foursquares at the time. They weren't really, they were just sort of houses, but clearly, now we can see they were a very distinctive type of structure that have left a big visual impact on a lot of communities right out into the Midwest and everywhere. There's another picture from the Sears catalog showing the house being built with everything is cut and labeled and everything else. What could possibly go wrong? Although the manual is quite good about that. It says, look, be careful with this bit. Don't make sure you get this the right way around. Otherwise, you're going to have to rip the house down and start all over again. But I mean, I'd love to know more stories about how many people, just simply bought it, got it off the train, and essentially built it themselves. I think there's quite a number of people that did that, or at least, got family members to help, or had somebody down the road, or a cousin or a builder help them. And then they'd bring in the plumbers and the electricians and all the other people to do those kind of work. But it obviously wasn't unknown for, I'm building a house. I really am. I'm building it myself. I'm on page 3 already of 96. And of course, as Sears was pushing this, obviously, as you want one of these houses, or well, you want any one of our catalog houses for these reasons. Save your rent money. Don't rent anymore. Give that kiddies a chance. This is the whole get out into the open air, healthy, because each of these houses, even urban areas, had at least a 1/4 acre lot with them. So you did have, a yard of your own. Get close to nature by growing cabbages and hurting your back. And have real friends and neighbors. Presumably, if you live somewhere else, you don't have real friends and neighbors. Only in an area occupied by Sears kit houses, you have real friends and neighbors. And you can be independent in old age, because you could live in this house until you're quite elderly, which is probably true. And our easy payment plan makes it possible. Why pay rent? So this is the other big thing, of course. You're going to be a property owner. You're going to own the land and own the building. It's a big thing. And I want to just do a quick plug here while I'm talking about house ownership for the Stoutsburg Silent African American Museum. We are currently working on a preservation plan for the farmhouse, the house next to the AME Church on Hollow Road, which is the Reasoner True house. And what is important about that house is that from the 1860s onwards until the 1990s, it was occupied by African Americans who firstly rented it and then bought it. In the 1880s, they bought it, and it was in African American ownership for well over 100 years. And this, if you know anything about the local history of African American, this is a huge thing. It's a huge deal, tremendously important for people like that to be able to own their own property. And so these Foursquare houses are kind of part of that, owning your own property. The American dream, really. Yeah. Oh, and here's one of the forms. This is the inquiry form. You send in, what do I like? What sort of plumbing do I want? And turn to the next page for our easy financial terms. Which modern home do you like in our catalogue? To what station would it be? Would shipment be made? I'd love to have seen this. Would you? One of these, they come in on a freight car or something, presumably, and get all offloaded. What sort of heating do you want? What sort of lighting do you want? So a lot of flexibility. And in the catalogue, you'll see you can pick out lighting details and fixtures and all kinds of other stuff. Absolutely amazing, really. And then going back to the floor plans for a minute, I think they're quite interesting. How was a house supposed to be laid out? You're starting kind of from scratch. What do you want this house to be like inside? And there's a lot of commonality, as you might imagine, with these houses. So if you look at the one on the bottom left there, you come up the steps onto a nice front porch. And then you go into the front door, which is very often to one side. Sometimes it's in the middle, but very often it's to one side of the facade, and that leads you usually into a space, which here they're calling a vestibule, almost like a little room. Sometimes it's actually quite spacious, and it's a sort of hallway and a reception area, really, and quite often this area is separated from the living room next to it by an opening, which is with wooden columns and this kind of thing. Beautiful wood, beautifully made, very rich feeling, lovely wood floors. So you come into a very pleasant space, again well lit, usually by a window right next to you, flowing light onto the stairs. And then you can turn into the living room, or you go straight ahead into the kitchen. And from the kitchen, you can get down into the basement and outside. There's a door on the side. This is, again, very common. You have a side door, which is half down in the ground, half into the basement, half up to the kitchen area, and a dining room. And they often helpfully, in these catalogues, put what sort of furniture you might want to have in there. You have in the dining room, a dining table, which can seat 6. We'll want a piano. In some of them it says phonograph, things like that. So they're sort of suggesting what you might do. And then the one at the top left is again very similar. As you see, you go into a sort of landing and into the living room, and it's a bit more difficult in this one to get your way into the kitchen, but there is a space for the piano in the living room. Don't forget that. And the buffet, what are they calling it? Buffet space in the dining room. Then when you get upstairs, you get into a central hallway with all the bedrooms opening out from it. Closets everywhere, walk-in closets. Well, not walk-in exactly, but big closets built in, and we say a full bathroom upstairs. So really moving into a house like this in 1920 was a very nice thing to. Moving into one in 2025 would be nice too. I like them a lot. Just a few more, just to show that this is Center Street. This is the Ray Bergen's house, I think. Is that your house? Oh no. Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, it's your house. It's your house. Well, I get you guys confused. It's your house. 1912, correct? Is that right? Yeah. Again, just a sort of reminder, really, of the features. Different treatments of the first and second floor exteriors. Nice big windows in the attic. What do you use your attic for? It's a bedroom. Okay. And a porch, and you've got a wraparound porch. It wraps around a little bit. Okay. And we get sort of simpler ones like this one on East Prospect with markedly fewer windows. I'm not quite gone on what's gone on with this one, but again, it's basically a nice Foursquare. And then probably one of the simpler ones. This is 110 West Broad Street, which has recently been sold. It is being renovated, and it's on the smaller side. And this is 1923. We know this because somebody wrote the date on some of the wood inside the front porch, apparently. We built this in 1923. I think that should be a law, actually. It should be compulsory for you to put the date on your bill. It would help my architectural historian colleagues very greatly indeed. Again, this is one example where you see the side door, which goes down to the basement and up to the kitchen area. And this is another tricky one. When I was looking, I usually see chubbies from the inside, I have to admit, but anyway, sometimes I can't. As you can see, it looks quite like a Foursquare. It really does. It's a nice, solid, squarish building, and it has the overhanging eaves. But actually, they're not flat. They actually curve in a bit. But it has the nice dormer windows. But the trouble is that this house, this building, was here as early as 1890. There was something here as early as 1890, and probably quite a bit before that, probably soon after the railroad came through in the 1870s. So what's happened here is that somebody's Foursquarified this house, this building. They said, oh, it looks a bit sort of, old-fashioned. Why don't we put a sort of Foursquare-y roof on it and sort of probably regularize the windows a little bit and make them a bit bigger than they were on the original house. And so this is an example of where the influence of the Foursquare sort of ethic, if you like, had sort of affected other people who sort of retrospectively sort of fitted some Foursquare kind of features to their houses. And it's been this building has been lots of things, a candy store for quite a long time, and it's so nice to see it back in a prominent position in the Hopewell community these days again. So that sort of circles around to the end to a house being changed into a Foursquare rather than being one right from the beginning. But I hope that's given you some sense of, what these houses are all about, how to identify them. As I say, it's purely a sort of, in my case, it's an affection thing. I think because they're very distinctive, they're very American to me, and they're very attractive. I mean, those of you who live in them know perfectly well what nice houses they are, and they've aged very well. I mean, they're still very livable houses today, and I think they're a nice little what should we say, subset, sort of not even a footnote to history. I think they're an important part of the history of this community, and they haven't been given really the sort of historical research attention that you might imagine they have. They're sort of still rather being taken for granted, I think. But I hope pioneers like me will make us realize that Foursquares must be preserved. anyway, the ones in Hopewell are being very well looked after, I think, by their owners, what I can see. So thank you, those who live in them, and thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you. I'll try to answer any questions as long as they aren't too detailed. Yeah, so it's yeah. I think it's in the 1980s. I think, would that be about right, Michael? Do you think? Yeah. Yes, and I don't even know who coined it. You find it mentioned. This book, written by Robert Guter and Janet Foster, who's a prominent historical architect, architectural historian in New Jersey, and she says they've only recently started to be called by this name, and but she doesn't give a source for it or anything. So, Michael, you don't happen to know, do you? No. Well, that's a relief. Okay. Good. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, it's so it not what that they weren't calling them anything particularly at the time. It's a house, but it's obviously a distinctive style that people chose. Well, I hope I've got lots of important historical information from the questionnaire that's been passed around, and I look forward to getting. It's Douglas, someone else can go. Have you uncovered any photos in archives you have in the Historical Society of some of the houses being unloaded from the train? No, I've never seen anything. No, they must exist, if not here, somewhere. Yeah, and I mean, I have seen pictures of the huge Sears sort of depots where they're kind of assembling all this, like warehouses and things. But no, it would be great to see pictures of these houses being, as you say, unloaded and brought to the site and being built. But I haven't seen one. Yeah. But I haven't seen it. No. Okay. No. Mm-hmm. I have most of the stuff is more temporary. Yeah. Yeah. But to see the bulk and size of it, you could probably find it sort of relatively. I think so, yeah. There's probably somebody somewhere who's got a huge collection of, Foursquare memorabilia somewhere out in, Wisconsin or somewhere. But I'm sure there probably is some group that's very keen on these buildings, but I haven't identified them. But then I haven't. Yeah. No, there were several other ones. Their names escape me for the moment. Sears was the most prominent, but there were at least 3 or 4 others that were doing the same thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. How many in the catalog? How many Foursquares? 50. Oh, kits overall. That I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But no, that would be interesting to know. I mean, obviously, some of these Foursquares were not kit houses. I mean, I think the grand one down by the Runyon House is not a kit, but several of the others are. But I don't have the ability to distinguish that myself at the moment. But it would be very interesting to know how many of them were kits. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm just going to measure your house. Well, yes, actually, yes, we go in and rip sheetrock off. Yeah, that's fine. We'll be round to the Rayburgers tomorrow with my. We bought it for $3. And I received a letter from one of the son's grandsons Okay.
And then we had to, after 6 months, one of there was 3 bubbles of plastic. Realized it was just too loose, so we had to take that plastic out. We opened the wall.
Oh, you could. That's great. And that's 1911, is it, your house? Did you tell me 1911?
1911.
Yeah. So that's definitely a series. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. That's the way we're going to find out, you know, other than documentary stuff. But yeah, that's great. Yeah. And actually, what that question of plaster, this is the time. Actually, some early form of wallboard is starting to be used as well as getting plasterers in to plaster. There are now in the 1920s anyway, sort of what the predecessors of sheetrock are coming available, making that process much easier to do as well if you're building the house yourself. Yeah.
I had the idea that we're set in pieces, parts of the walls assembled already.
Yeah.
Like the back of the stick built now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's the impression that I get. That yeah, you'd think, well, you know, can't they give you a window or two or something like that? But it looks as if it was all in pieces, probably because it's easier to transport, you know. So no, it's a good question. I mean, maybe the doors were already assembled, but I don't know. But the impression I get from the Sears catalog is that yeah, it all comes. You have to do it all pretty much. Yeah. Another question somewhere? Yeah. There's several models. I think there's, as I think I said, that in the Sears catalog, the 1926 catalog, there's 9 different models that you would think of as Foursquares. They're all slightly different price, different number of rooms, that kind of thing. So there was quite a variety, you know, but the basic concept was very clear. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. It was fun to do this. I'm talking about